Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Today we're going to be looking at entries into the macro challenge. So where we are, live. If you happen to be watching live, then leave a little comment. Let me know where you are, what the weather's doing, all the usual chat stuff, and let's make a start. So hello, yes, and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. If you're looking to improve your understanding of photography, well, then you're in the right place. Yes, if you... so today then, well, 2 weeks ago, I think it was Robert had won the Smug Points leaderboard for July. I'm fairly slow this morning, trying to link all the bits together. Anyway, so he'd won and he suggested the idea of macro. So a couple of weeks ago, I did an episode entirely on macro to give you an idea of what it was and what you might be able to do if you didn't actually have a macro lens, other ways of coping with it as well, but a general introduction to macro photography. And then set a challenge. So today we're going to be looking at the results. We've had about a dozen people or so send in their images, and we're going to take a look and hopefully become inspired by what everybody else has been doing. So with a combination of what you learnt a couple of weeks ago, or if you didn't watch it or forgotten it, then you can go back and check it out. And what you see today will hopefully give you a few ideas of what to go out and try yourself. Now, I can see we have a couple of comments in already, so let's see. April says, greetings all from sunny Long Island, New York. John says, good day all from central Ohio, where the weather has been great. Viji says, good evening from Chennai in India. Susan says, hello from a wet, cold and windy Kakubri. Not much summer this year. Nadia says, hello from a cold and very wet Fife. Nick says, hello all from an overcast Bath. Janet says, hi from a hot Mississauga. I'll likely miss the next few live podcasts as I'll be away for the month of September. And I think over in Colombia and Yukon, and I think live podcast overlaps with sunrise. You just have to get up early, Janet. It'll be fine. Set your alarm, you'll be okay. Robert Schaefer says, good morning from a hot, smoky Texas. And Meg says, hello, everyone. So, yes, where are we at then? So, yes, as Susan says, I'm in Kakubri, just down the road. Very similar kind of weather here. It's wet, cold, and a sense of, well, as my wife would say, it's very back-endish. Basically, it has been for about the last month or so, which basically means this kind of feels more like the back end of the year. It's very much more autumn. It doesn't really feel like we had too much of a summer here. I've heard elsewhere that we have, this has been the hottest summer on records for, however long and many decades or centuries. Unfortunately, that hasn't translated to Scotland. Oh no, Janet says, no, I'll be shooting sunrise during the podcast. Oh, so you will be up early enough, but you'll be prioritising sunrise photographs. Have you got your priorities right? Right, okay. Right, so let's make a start then. So what are we talking about? So this notion of macro then. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through various ideas of macro photography. And I think that probably the best one to start with is April. So let me just flick this over here, minimize that, and if I'm lucky, press that button, and you should be able to see April's rather wonderful picture here. This is my entry for the macro contest. It is in my archive, but I really like this one. It's a Colorado beetle on a flower. It was not afraid, so it was very easy to photo. And what a great start to the macro challenge this is. Really close up of a beetle. And this, to go back to the idea of, well, what exactly counts as macro? And in essence, your basic definition is that you're looking for a larger than 1-to-1 ratio. So essentially your photo of your object should be bigger than the actual object itself. Now, obviously, that kind of depends on how big you print it out and how big your screen is. I mean, let's face it, if you're looking at this on a small mobile phone, perhaps the beetle actually isn't that much larger than, as you're seeing it, than it would be if you were seeing it in the flesh. But generally speaking, I suppose, if you're kind of talking about printing something to, certainly a 4:6 photo, maybe a kind of A4 photo, or if you're looking at something on the screen and it's fairly, and my computer screen is, I mean, it's a big screen or bigger screen, but yes, definitely fits nicely under the heading of macro here. Great that it sat still, because so many insects don't sit still for very long. Makes them very and especially if you are doing macro and you've got to get in really close, it will notice the movement of something coming close to it or the shadow falling on it, and by the time you've got close enough to get in focus and gone click, it's very often flown away or crawled away if it's depending on what it is you're photographing. So great start there from April. And just to remind you all that I will be handing out Smug Points as we go. So Smug Points, accumulation of contributions to the podcast. You get 5 Smug Points just for turning up to here today and saying hello. So if you happen to be watching live and you haven't done so yet, make sure you type in hello, and then that way you get your guaranteed 5 Smug Points added to the leaderboard. If you happen to have sent in a picture today, like about a dozen of you have, you'll get 10 Smug Points. And then at the end of the this episode, I will go through and I will award an extra few Smug Points for my favourite runner-up and third place for my idea of what the best ones are for for this podcast. A couple more comments here. What have we got? John says, British Columbia and Yukon are great places. Have a great time. Janet, I will be up near the Georgia Bay for a few days. Okay, so comments where everybody's going on holiday. Viji says, good capture. Nurije's joined us and says, hi, everyone. April saying, thank you. Robert Schaefer says, nice bug shot. Susan says, love the bug's colours, April. And Nadia says, lovely image, April. Okay, so that's a kind of a good start to this. Now, next up then, we're going to go to Janet. And Janet, who's going to be off photographing sunrises, which isn't really something you could do in macro, I don't think. Let's see, if you had to be having a photo that was bigger than the object itself, I suppose if you're photographing the sun, then you'd need a picture that was basically more than 1 million times bigger than the Earth. So yeah, macro photos of the sun are never really going to work. However, Janet has decided to go for this one. She's got this picture of typewriter keys. She says, I've attached my submission for the macro challenge as a close-up of the keys of my mother's old typewriter from the 1950s. And that's a great one. In fact, actually, I think my wife Maggie also has her mother's old typewriter as well, which I can't remember if it was 1950s or could have been as well. 1940s maybe, but yes, that really kind of big, close. It's a wonderful textural kind of shot. And yeah, if you can find, I sometimes think whether it's you can find any kind of, particularly kind of vintage equipment, whether it's typewriters, old radios, telephones, these kind of things. They kind of have always this sort of extra level of story and narrative in them. So well worth kind of seeking out. So yeah, thanks very much for sending that one in, Janet. Right, okay, where are we? April says creative macro. Susan says, well seen, Janet, great image. John says, nice shot of the keys, worth points to me. Right, okay, so where are we going to go next then? So next up then, Marilyn. So Marilyn has sent in this rather lovely photo of a bee on a flower here. So she says, Marilyn says, hi Kim, I've spent this summer working on macro and have found it to be both challenging and rewarding. These tiny rock rose blooms are less than an inch in diameter. And I suppose they kind of must be, really, because if you look at the size of the bee is practically as wide, as long as the flower is wide. Fantastic pollen sac there, sitting on the bee's the bee's legs. We have. She says, I used my 105mm macro lens handheld. After many shots both with and without bees, I decided this was my favourite. And it is a great shot. I really love the colours in this, love the detail. Now, one of the things I noticed that with this one, Marilyn, is when you sent it in, that you'd use the noise reduction system, I think in Photoshop, which is a particular feature you can use in Camera Raw. And it's a great way of kind of smoothing out the noise, getting rid of too much noise. One of the things I would say with this, though, is sometimes if you kind of overdo the noise reduction, whilst it kind of clears out the noise, it essentially does it by blurring it. Now, it does a kind of smart blur with it, but sometimes you lose some of the detail too. And when I kind of look at this, we can kind of zoom in a little bit. We've got these sort of lovely sharp bits of leg here in pollen sac, and I can assume, I guess here that there's bits here where the back, over where the wings are here, where it's just sort of blurred it a little bit too much, I think, because we know that the wings, I mean, you can see the pattern on the wing here where it's a bit sharper, has that lovely kind of detail. And that detail has got, that pattern has got lost in the smoothing process. And that's because, I mean, the noise reduction system is just, there's a bit of AI in there trying to work out what's worth smoothing out a bit more. And sometimes it smooths out a patch, but you lose the detail with it as well. And I think likewise, the eyes of bees can, have got very kind of, and actually if you'd left a little bit of noise left in, I think that would have worked fractionally better. I mean, it's a beautiful photo. I think it's a great photo. All I'm saying here is that when you do the noise reduction, kind of watch the levels, maybe play around a little bit, or even put it on a separate layer to the kind of a version which has not had the noise reduction done to it, and possibly even change the opacity, so sort of make it brighter or sorry, more to 100% to 50% to 20%, and move the slider backwards and forwards and see if there's a kind of a happy medium. Or maybe it might be just in a couple of patches. So in this case, those couple of patches here where I feel it's just looking slightly too blurred on the eye, on the back of the shoulder here, and on the wing of the bee. Actually, a little bit of noise wouldn't really have been that much problem. Sometimes you can get away with a little bit of noise if if you're still maintaining some of the detail. Sometimes sort of going in and blurring can just take out some of the detail a little bit too much, and then it sort of starts to look a little bit more artificial if you're not too careful. That said, beautiful colours, beautiful layout, lovely macro. But just that bit on noise reduction, little point there for anybody who's using Photoshop or any other software that uses noise reduction. I think it's one of those things to look out for, be aware of. Right, what have we got here? Viji says, pretty shot, Janet, such rich colours. John says, nice bee shot. Susan says, love this one, Marilyn. Those stamens look pin sharp, great detail. Viji says she agrees with Susan, and Nurije says, very nice, Marilyn. Okay, next up then, we have another flower shot, no bee this time, but this one's from Meg. Meg says, I took a photograph of a dahlia flower at the garden centre outside for the macro challenge because I really like the shapes and the colours of it. And yes, we actually went off to a garden centre last weekend, I think it was. And I saw Meg whipping out her phone here and there. I think I took a couple of shots myself. Garden centres, great places for getting shots of flowers. Yes, I mean, it was a dull overcast day, but yes, these dahlias were kind of really rich and vibrant. And yeah, nice shot there, Meg. I think that kind of square crop, bring it in fairly close. Colourful texture. Yeah, lovely shot there, Meg. Thank you for sending that one in. Where are we? Susan says, beautiful dahlia, Meg. April says, nice shot. And VG says, Meg, wow. Nadia says, lovely shot, Meg. April saying, wow, I thought there was a reflection, but I see now that there was not. I'm not sure which one you're referring to there. Anyway, right, okay, so nice one there, Meg. Next up then, Nick. And Nick sent in, now unfortunately it's a fairly low res photo, so I kind of got to zoom in a little bit. Nick says, this is my photo of sugar granules for the macro challenge. So that's a bit of fun there. I think I sprinkled a few spoonfuls of granulated sugar on a sheet of textured paper. I changed it to black and white because I thought it would give the granules more definition. They almost look like split cut diamonds. Yeah, and I think that's probably a good call actually. Because the sugar's basically white, that colour isn't necessarily going to add that much to a shot like this, and by going black and white it really allows you to kind of play around with the texture and contrast. Quick little point here from Nick, not just to Nick, but I've had it's one of these things that periodically happens. I had somebody else do this this week, is sometimes if you are sending me photos, if you are emailing me photos, try and make sure that you're emailing me a good, reasonable, high resolution photo. Because sometimes what happens is, depending on the settings on your device, sometimes if you're sending from a tablet or a phone and you send an image, the tablet or phone will assume, oh, you're emailing an image, so it will give you a low resolution web version of the image that gets sent. And in this case, we can see that it's not really filling the screen. I've only got about half the size. And generally speaking, as we've talked before about, especially when you're working with screens, you've not got a lot of space or real estate as such to work with in the first place. So it's quite good if you can kind of fill the screen. If you send me a higher resolution one, then that allows me to zoom in and get more detail out of a picture as well. So whether that's for a challenge like this, or certainly definitely if you're ever sending something in for critique and feedback. So that aside though, I think it's a fun one to go for. And what I also like about that is the ability to kind of play with stuff that's in your house already. You don't have to, charge about and sort of fly off to expensive places or do anything else. There's something, you're kind of in still life territory really. It's what have we got in the way of household objects, or just, as you say, sprinkle of sugar granules. I think is quite a fun one to do. So thanks for sending that one in, Nick. What have we got here? So Meg says, thank you for your lovely comments. April says, that's cool looking. Robert says, well done, Meg. Great colours. Viji says, this is a good idea. Meg says, that's absolutely amazing. Nick says, okay, we'll do that next time. That's about sending in the larger picture, I think. Susan says, great image, Nick. We should always look closer at the ordinary things in life. That sounds like the kind of the kind of life lessons in general. Yes. We go around living in our own little bubbles, not really noticing what's small but important right in front of us. Maybe that's what macro photography is really all about. In some ways, actually, though, it is also what photography is about. It is about that learning to look. We've talked about this many times. It's about that kind of learning to look and learning to notice. And when you're out for a walk, what do you notice? I mean, I'll just have a little detour here to remind some of you that a few weeks ago, I was talking about the idea of playing around. I have a second Instagram account set up. My main Instagram account is Ayres Photography, and that's where I put up like things about the podcast or any particular big shoots I've been doing. But I also set up another one a little while ago called Ayres Phone Pics. And for that, I use it for, it's an observational exercise. It's purely for my phone. It's not photography that I'm going to be out there selling, out there promoting or anything like that. It's a kind of like a sketchbook thing for me. And what I try and do is when I go for a daily walk or whenever I'm out somewhere, if I get a moment to try and just see what's around me, what's interesting, what might make a kind of a little interesting photo. And I take my phone out and I look for something, and it could be a bit of peeling paint or rust or some kind of interesting shadows or and it's just every now and then, find an interesting flower growing out in an unusual place. So these kind of things, I think, are, that notion of learning to observe, learning to see what's around you, rather than the kind of necessarily the big picture. It's quite often the small things which are what grab you. So, and I've been doing this now for a few months, this kind of observational exercise thing on Instagram, and it's quite fun, and I'm kind of getting into it now. And it's certainly something I would recommend as a way of kind of keeping your eye in. Ultimately, if we can take a photo every day or nearly every day, certainly a few times a week, is going to help our eye, is going to help develop. A lot of these photos, they're never going to go anywhere, but they are practice. Just like if you are playing the guitar, you're learning to play, you play scales, you play little chords, you play things. You don't have to be performing, but they're kind of keeping your hands in so that when you are actually performing or doing something more important, you've got all the skills there literally at your fingertips. Okay, that aside, a couple more comments here. Debbie's joined us and says, "Hi Kim, been too long, glad you could make it." Nick says, "Thanks Meg and Susan." Janet says, "I set up one of those secondary Instagram accounts, but my phone doesn't seem to want to connect to it, or no problem on the iPad or computer, which defeats the purpose." Yeah, it's kind of a little bit depends on your system. I sometimes quite often what I'll do is I'll take the photo on the phone, but then because I'm on an Android system, it goes automatically into Google Photos. I can then access Google Photos from the computer, and if I want to just crop in and do a quick edit to it rather than editing it on the phone before uploading it to Instagram, I can. Now, if you've got an Apple, I think the similar things where you can have things go, so you can take the photo on your phone, it will go into your Apple Cloud, and is it iCloud or is that something else? Anyway. But then maybe you can kind of then upload it later from your tablet. So that's an option for you. Okay, let's go back to photos. Where were we? So after we did Nick, so Nurije. So yes, Nurije sent in this rather beautiful photo. It says, macro challenge, buds of flowers that are only just starting to emerge, taking just a few houses down from where I live. And yeah, again, that's exactly that kind of thing. You're out for a walk, and I mean, not far from the house, just, probably, 20, 30 yards away from the house. These little flowers coming out, and rather lovely. Looks like there's one of these kind of little mites, blood spiders, tiny little things here. Now that's where, if you've got the real big powerful macro lens, you can go in and try and get one of those as well. But at the same time, these, what I think are probably quite small flowers, do look quite good when they're kind of blown up and you're kind of really getting amongst them. Lovely colour combination, a kind of purple with that kind of yellowy green, I think really works quite well. So yeah, nicely spotted there, Nurije. Thanks for sending that one in. April says, very dainty, pretty. And Susan says, love these colours, Nurije. Robert says, great colours. Nurije says, I only noticed that when I downloaded the photo, the little red spider things, yeah. And Debbie says, hi Kim, I have some macro shots out of the box. Yeah, a little bit too late to get them in today. Generally speaking, if you have photos that you want to sort of send in for challenges or for feedback, critique, try to get them in to me at least a couple of days before the podcast, because while all the talking of this podcast, while I'm completely unscripted, everything's just kind of coming off the top of my head with a very loose kind of structure of where I'm going. The planning of it is happening throughout the week. So if I'm going to sort of be able to work out what kind of feedback, what images I'm going to put them into a folder and everything, then I kind of need time to arrange that. So for submissions, try and get them in advance. However, having said that, if you're on the Facebook group, the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, and you've got a photo which you feel particularly pleased of with, or or even that you would like a little bit of feedback from kind of everybody else, then feel free to stick the photo into the group as well. And then you can either say, hey, I did this, I'm feeling really pleased with it, I quite like the way this went, or I did this, I'm struggling a little bit with whatever aspect it is you're struggling with. Any thoughts or ideas would be useful. So you can always put and for that matter, if you have any which you would like feedback for in the podcast, quite a few of the podcasts, I have a little slot where people can send me an image and I can give you direct feedback on it here. Right, Nurije is saying thank you everyone. Okay, next up then, we're going to go to Robert Gullick. Now, Robert said, here's my attempt at a macro photo. And what he's done is he sent in this picture of a guitar. He says, I tried to photograph dragonflies using focus bracketing, but they moved too much to keep the alignment. The lead singer of Rush, Geddy Lee, who is also the bass player, released a book of his bass guitars, Geddy Lee's Big Beautiful Book of Bass. Since we bought the book, I wanted to try and get similar types of photos. I've tried to photograph my guitars, but never get the instruments completely in focus. We had a lesson on focus bracketing for macro photography at the Dallas Camera Club, DCC, same initials. The Dallas Camera Club a few weeks ago, and I thought I would try it out on my baritone guitar. I chose it because of the wood grain detail and its sleek curves. With focus bracketing, I took 140 pictures with the lowest increments. Helicon software was used to stack them, a trial version. With the edits, I chose to do a colour and a black and white. I think I prefer the latter. Let me know what you think. So this is this colour version, and this is the black and white version. So, okay, so, well, now, a couple of things going on here. One is the notion of focus stacking. So for anybody who's kind of wondering what that is, it's very often used in macro photos. Because of this problem with macro photography is that your macro is a kind of a zoom lens already. So you're closer in, which has narrowed your depth of field. And because of the narrow depth of field, the chances of getting almost anything that you're trying to photograph in focus from front to back is just about impossible. So there's the notion of focus stacking, where what you do is you take multiple photos, and with each one you just change the focus a little bit. So you take multiple photos, each one focused on a slightly different part of it, and then you do focus stacking. So depending, you get the software now. Photoshop can do this. Robert's trying out Helicon software, a trial version of that to put them together. And by doing that, you can generally kind of stack together a photo so the whole thing happens to be in focus. Now, what I might do, given the fact that when I did the macro, Sandra was talking about macro a couple of weeks ago, somebody specifically asked me about focus stacking, and the fact that Robert's done it here, if there's any kind of interest in it, perhaps next week I could actually do a slot on focus stacking with the podcasts. Let me know if you're interested in that. It's an interesting idea, something to play around with. Okay, focus stacking. Next bit then is actually macro. Is this really macro? And you've gone to a huge amount of effort here, Robert. I greatly appreciate you doing that. 140 shots. That's a lot of work to go into this. And sure enough, it is in focus from down here, where we have the bridge, across the pickups, right through to the frets, and we can even see the little the wound parts on the strings here. Lots of detail from front to back. But is it macro? And I would say it's a close-up, but it's not really a macro. If we go back to that 1-to-1 ratio, you would have to be looking at this on a very large screen in order for this to match the ratio of an actual guitar. This, I would say, is where, generally speaking, under most people's conditions of looking at a photo, is the object is still going to be bigger than the photograph. So it's not, you haven't got that 1-to-1 ratio. So close up, yes. Photo stacking, yes. Macro, not really. Okay, so I'd say you've just missed the boat there. So important to understand what the definitions are, and that's fine for this challenge. You can do it in a safe space. But if you were entering into a macro competition for the camera club, or for things like Photo Crowd or whatever, you're unlikely to get marked as highly. But thank you for sending that one in. But there was, what I also was going to say is, one of the things it does kind of feel when I look at this picture is it feels a little bit dark, and especially if I go to the colour one as well, it doesn't feel like you're really using the full range, tonal range here. And this is something we've kind of talked a little bit before about. So if I, for example, if I open this in Photoshop, Robert, so we go here, and what I do is if I go to filter, not filter, sorry, I go over here and select the levels. So we go to levels, and what we see from the histogram here is everything is bunched over on the left, which is in the darks, in the shades, and there's one tiny thin line. So if I drag this over, what we get is we get a brighter picture of the guitar. Now, the only problem is when we come to here, while the rest of it's got bright, because of the way the light was highlighting on the guitar strings, we are getting a blowout on the strings. But what we could just as easily do, I'll duplicate that layer. If you take it into Photoshop, into Camera Raw, something like that, what we could do, see if I do auto, it's brightening it up a bit. But let's just say we take the exposure, we bring the exposure up to what actually, now, let's actually tell you what, let me just make sure I'm dragging this into sight because it's very important here. I want you to see the histogram at the top here. Now, as I move it this way, notice how the histogram moves across. We're getting more light there. But there also comes a little point, and I want you to see if you can see up on your screen, there's a little spot here, which as I move over to the right, boop, we've hit a red point. So that little red light there has said we've now maxed out on the whites. Okay, so I'll bring that down, so I can kind of move that down. So now we've got it bright, but perhaps there's maybe still a little bit of, maybe I want it a little bit brighter, I come up a bit. But at this point, let's say I take it up, so we've now hit but that's because of these bits on the strings. If I take the highlights and I drag the highlights down, we can see that actually we're getting the texture back, but we've now come back out of the red. So we can kind of nudge that up a little bit more if we want. So we can actually make it quite a bit brighter. But what I'll do, I don't want to go too bright, I'll take something like that and then just take those highlights down. We still haven't got the red. I can go back to here. And we've now got much more full range. And this is something we've talked before about this, Robert, and sometimes, usually in terms of your black and white pictures, is that very often your black and white pictures look quite dark. When you're going tonal, but the same thing with the bits here, you've got a range. And when you've got an object like this, why not utilize the full range? Go from the blacks to, just about hitting the whites. And then that gives you much more. It also makes it much more easy to see. If you consider that on a screen, say you had this on like one of these photo crowd guru shots kind of things where people are scrolling past, they're going to skim past this, whereas if they can see it, this is going to grab the attention just that little bit quicker. Okay, so make sure you are using the full range of tones if you can, unless there's a very, very good reason not to. But thanks for sending that one in. Lots to talk about there, and that's always good. Gives us a few ideas, things tangents to go off on. And sometimes it is these tangents where we find out extra little bits of information that we hadn't really thought about. Okay, so where are we? Ayres says great shot. Viji says incredible, Robert. Nadia says great image. Susan says super light. Robert looks great in black and white. Nurije says she likes the black and white. Robert Schaefer says great image. Robert, black and white is definitely my favourite. And John says I like the guitar shot. Robert, excellent. Okay. Quick little reminder here then that if you are finding these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. At some point I might get sponsorship for these podcasts, but for that I probably need to have a few thousand viewers rather than the beautiful dozen or a couple of dozen that I currently do. So if you know anybody who wants to sponsor these, then great. But in the meantime, until we get there, then buymeacoffee.com/ is certainly one of the ways that helps keep these going. Right, okay, let's move on. Next up then, we're going to go to Robert Schaefer, other Robert from Texas. So, other Robert has sent us this. And to explain what it is you're actually looking at, if you're going slightly cross-eyed thinking, what is this? He says, here's my entry for this week's Lego challenge. Sorry, my eyes getting mixed across. Here's my entry for this week's challenge. After seeing your Lego Batman, you may remember in the I was using my little Lego Batman here, as part of the examples of how to photograph macro a couple of weeks back. Robert goes on to say, I realised I could do something similar with my California Raisin sax player. That's what it is you're looking at, a California Raisin sax player. When I started taking, when I was taking saxophone lessons, I started collecting miniature sax players. This is one of them. I have photographed them before, but not as macro. I don't have a macro lens, so I use my 18-135 everyday lens. I did okay, but I do need a macro lens. Maybe for Christmas. Well, maybe for Christmas. I think they're worth it. I debated for a long time before I got my macro lens, Robert. I do have to say, could I justify the investment of it? What made the difference for me was lockdown, to be honest. When we were in lockdown and I was stuck at home and I couldn't go out and photograph people as I usually do, and there was much more kind of, well, if I'm going to photograph something, it's probably going to be around the house or it's going to be in the garden. At that point, I relented and bought the macro lens. Once I did, I was delighted that I had. I think it does really kind of open up a whole bunch of opportunities for you. So I would recommend it if you're going to. Meanwhile, fun one, and I like the fact that you put your California Raisin sax player in front of a bunch of grapes, pre-raisins, I guess. So yeah, creating a nice little kind of keeping the theme going with it. Lots of fun there, getting in close. So nice one there, Robert. Thanks for sending that one in. So what have we got? April says, LOL, cute. Viji says, haha. Nurije says, why grapes as the background? Well, the grapes are because they're pre-raisins. Leave grapes long enough and, that's what raisins are made of. I'm assuming that's what it is, Robert. Or maybe you were just going for something which had a similar kind of colour scheme. Meg says, wow, that's absolutely amazing. Nadia says, great shot. John says, brilliant. And Susan says, very clever, Robert. Right, okay. Next up, then, we're going to go to Sandra. Now, Sandra said, following the podcast, I went online to find the focal length of the macro lens I own, but I struggled to use. And after finding found some videos on how to use it. So after watching the first one, I went out into the garden to have a go at photographing flowers in the back garden. They were actually in focus, which made a nice change, but nothing special as photos. So I decided to have another go. Originally, I planned to photograph flowers again. However, when I was driving back from the gym this morning, this was a couple of days ago when she sent it in, I noticed a spider and web on the passenger side of the front windscreen. So I quickly grabbed my camera, took a few photos and looked at them on the computer. I thought they're quite good, but then I thought I could spray water on the web to get the droplets glinting in the sunshine. I went back to my car to find the spider had moved. So I sprayed the web, took some photos, but then the spider came back to the web. I think it was enjoying the water cooling on the car. I attached so here we go. Here's the photo. So here we have the spider on the web with droplets. Lovely macro shot. This is definitely a macro shot because if the spider was that size, it would be quite terrifying. But she's also attached a black and white version. Says same photo, can't decide which I like best for Sunday's challenge. So they're both kind of interesting, I think, when you've got colour and black and white. When you've got so what's interesting here is, first of all, macro shot. I like the macro shot. I think the spider's really interesting. You've got a nice place where it is focused. We've got these little water droplets. Got bits of strands of web disappearing in and out of focus. Nice little bits of bokeh in the background. I think it's enough web to know it's in the web, but the web itself isn't overpowering. And this particular spider with all its little stripes and what have you. Now, given that it's got a grey background, so you've got the colour against the grey background. Actually, when you convert it to black and white, perhaps it does give you much more of a kind of a pattern. You've got this maybe does lend itself quite well to that notion of the contrast, because tonal contrast is quite a strong thing in this. Possibly, again, I might mess around with the levels a bit like I did with Robert's guitar. Maybe bring the overall exposure up, drag the highlights down a little bit, just to kind of boost a little bit more, because it does feel slightly dark. Now, having said that, Sandra, I think where it becomes quite interesting is if you go back to the colour, is where you can kind of play with colour a little bit more. Now, what I'm going to do here, let me just an idea, something to play around with. Let me just close Robert's one here. So let's take that. And so another option here is if we do, I'm going to play around here with colour lookup. Right, now colour lookup in Photoshop gives you a bunch of different colour grading options. We've talked about colour grading before. I've got prior podcasts on it. No doubt I'll come back to it again. But there are various presets, and the colour lookup gives you a whole bunch of presets that are already in here. Things from a kind of teal, orange, green through to particular Kodak film, which gives it a kind of slightly nostalgic look, through to futuristic bleak, crisp warm. So there's a bunch here, but what I was actually going to mention here is if you go crisp winter. Now, when you go crisp winter like this, what it does is it sort of adds a kind of a cool blue into the neutral colours. So that neutral grey has now become a soft blue. And now what happens is the orange brown of the spider is we're now talking to the complementary colours of that kind of orange and blue side of it. And I think, having said that, the orange has become slightly yellower. So what you could do at this point is we could maybe, if I go to hue saturation, and then what I do is if I go to the yellows, you see I can they pretty much isolate on the spider. Now obviously I don't want it red, don't want it green, so let's come back to the 0 mark here, and if I just start nudging it slightly to the left, not far, but just, what's that, 4, 9. Now if I go too far, it gets red. So we come back to the yellow and just nudge it a little bit. I just want that kind of orange. So I'm taking it down to roughly about sort of -10 on the yellows here. And that just kind of makes it feel slightly more orange. And if I really wanted to, now I would probably be quite happy with that if we were at a print level. If you were going to be putting it onto one of these web competition sites where people are doing again fast, high level, lots of number screening, you might want to not hue saturation, let's take the vibrance is what I was going to do. Take the vibrance and just nudge that a little bit more, and that just kind of pushes those blues and yellows a touch more. Now printed, that might be slightly oversaturated, but for web competitions and what have you, something like that. So that little bit. So at this point, then I think this is where the color comes back in, where you're using color contrast rather than just, and you then get the tonal contrast as well, because you've got the light patches and the dark patches of the spider. So that, Sandra, then is what I would say is if you want to go for the color, then you could maybe sort of mix in, just add that little bit of blue into the background, I think is one of the ways you could play around with it. And then you get that lovely kind of complementary colors going as well as keeping that kind of rich colour of the spider. Other than that, yes, your black and white version is another way to go when there's not a lot of colour in the picture. Great photo though. Thanks very much for sending that one in. Nadia says, great image. Susan says, the water spray, Sandra, great idea. Great macro shot. Prefer the black and white. Viji says, lighting also beautiful. Yes, I think it's because you've got the backlight there as well. That always makes a difference. And certainly it kind of makes the spider look almost sort of translucent, or, the light coming through it. April says, I like it with the cool blue colour. Nice. Robert Shaver says, I'm running behind you all, smoking a brisket. Had to pause to stoke the fire. Great spider shot. Okay, well, don't burn your brisket, that's for sure. Right, okay, where are we? So next up we're going to go to Susan. So yes, Susan's there mentioning the water spray, and Susan's gone for brought out her trusty water spray as well. So here we go. Susan says, I attach my submission for Sunday's macro challenge. This is a tiny dandelion seed taken with my 60mm macro lens on a mirrorless camera, which is 120mm for those using a DSLR. Is there that much difference? I know if you're going from a full frame to a DSLR, you tend to add about sort of 50%-ish. So a 60mm macro lens would be like a 90mm on a crop sensor. A full frame to a crop sensor would give you about an extra 50%. I'm not sure quite. You're obviously using a different system for this, so I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, she goes on to say, I plucked the seed from a full dandelion clock, stuck it on a bit of blue tack and sprayed it with my trusty spray bottle with watercolored blue with food dye. This took several attempts. Too little blue, too much blue, not enough water, too much water, the seed falling over, etc. But I am blessed with patience. Lighting was fairly simple, a white LED from the side. About 30 shutter clicks later, this is what I ended up with. Simple. Persistence, great thing. Looking forward to seeing some fabulous macro images. Now, okay, so thank you for sending this one in, Susan. So, yes, we've got the dandelion clock. We've got the little water droplets kind of spreading out. Fun photo. I have to say, one of the things that struck me with this was you were talking about going to the nth degree, getting the blue food dye and water and background. And I kind of wondered here, now, as everything's blue, could you have done it more neutral and essentially just shifted your hue saturation? If I open this in Photoshop, we've got the blue dye, but the background's blue as well. So it is monotone basically. If I take the hue saturation and just leave it at the master, then we can make it more purple or pink or red or yellow or green. So the whole colour of it shifts. I wonder whether if you were using blue food dye, whether you might have been more interested in having a slightly different colour background, maybe a sort of yellowish background, or if you were using a blue background to have a different colour food dye within it as well, and just kind of mix it up a little bit. Otherwise, something like this also, you can take the saturation out of it and then play around with brightness and contrast and actually create. In fact, that looks quite interesting there when we kind of take the colour out as well. And then it becomes much more then about, because ultimately if you're in monotone, then black and white is one way to go. Colour shift, you have a colour shift. Is there a reason for the colour shift? And what's the reason with the colour shift? And I think having everything blue is maybe kind of overkill on the blue. I think you either want, again, it's a bit like going back to Sandra's spider. What works well with having the blue background is if you've then got the kind of orange-ish spider. And I think otherwise, if it's not about the colour, then you may as well go black and white and then make the most of the contrast of the tones. And something like this, I think, when we're in sort of black and white, I think this actually becomes, to my mind, that little bit more interesting when we're not worrying too much about the colour. If we remove the colour, if we just if we have full colour and there's no colour contrast, okay, we go grey, we went back into the problem that I was talking with Robert, not enough variation. So you want to kind of make the most of, make sure your blacks are kind of getting a little bit black, slightly blacker, and allow your whites to be white. Have a kind of wider range of tones within anything you're doing. Lovely abstract, and certainly when you, at this point, if you kind of zoom in closer, it becomes really quite abstract. Something like that, I think, is quite a really interesting photo. So, a few suggestions there, Susan, to play around with, to kind of, and the way you might approach it. Thank you very much for sending that one in. Where are we? Nadia says great shot, Susan. April says great shot for blue contrast. Nurije says lovely shot, Susan, love it. Susan says might have to check up on the difference, Kim. And then Viji says spectacular. Nick says great photo, Susan. Viji says white as a background will be great too. Susan says, oh, I really like the mono treatment, thanks for that. And thanking everybody else. And Robert Schaefer also says great shot, Susan. Right, okay. Viji says the blue droplets on a white background could look good too. Well, that's true. Again, it is kind of getting that contrast. So on to the final image. In fact, I was going to show you a couple of images here, which were from Viji. And because what I really liked here was this one from Viji. Where what Viji has done here, as well as whatever other magnification she might be using, so it's got the chains of a necklace, but going into water. And water, of course, can also be a magnifier, especially when you've got water inside a jar or glass or something like that. It's magnifying it. So when we're talking about that notion of macro, of course, you can use water too. Completely forgotten about that idea, and it was delightful to see this from Viji. So here's a picture of her shot of her setup. So you can see the chain coming down, going into the water, and you know, so yes, something out. Another option to play with is just how water distorts the size of objects as we look at them, as we look through them as well. You can create magnifications and invert images and all sorts of things with a round glass or bowl of water and images behind them. There's a whole mass of things to play around with that. So that's lovely. So many thanks for that thought and idea there. But there was another shot Viji sent me, which I thought was quite fun, which was this one. And so we've got one of those little jeweler's glasses that I was talking about, like this, magnifiers, except for the fact that I think it looks like your one has a little light underneath it, so that which allows you to kind of see what's going on. And she's got a coin. Here looks very much like a British £1 coin, actually, 1989 there. And well, all I would suggest with this is actually, if you just wanted to tidy this one up a little bit, you could take a photo like this. I know you've probably just sent me the kind of quick out of the camera bit, but I would say if you kind of do something like that, just, you know, make, if you were wanting to kind of give it a little bit more of a ratio like that, and then depending on what tool you might want to use, I'll just take this kind of sort of selection tool here. We can then just remove, I don't know whether that's a little bit of finger or thumb or something. Just hit the generative fill. Photoshop has got this this little selection tool where you can literally paint the selection, which works quite well when you're using the generate tool. It's very good for just kind of removing little bits and pieces. There we go. It looks like I left a little bit of a line there, so I would need to maybe shift that one out afterwards. But anyway, there we go. Just removing that bit. But I thought that was what I like about this, though, is the fact that we've got the coin, is that actually, while the coin itself is not completely in focus, it has focused on the magnifying glass. And I quite like that. I quite like the fact that you're playing with a magnifying glass, but also the magnifying glass itself becomes part of the photo. Of course, we then also end up with that major problem that I've talked before, which is scratches and dust show up big time when you're playing around with a macro lens or zooming in with magnifying glasses. So, but anyway, a little bit of fun there. So many thanks for sending that one in, Viji. What do we say here? Oh, Katie's joined us from Australia. Says, hello, surprise, I'm here. You managed to come in just towards the end here, Katie. Glad you could make it, though. April says, very clever idea. Katie says, nice shot, Viji. Nurije says, great idea, Viji. John says, great shot, Viji. Viji says, thank you, everyone. And Katie says, oh, does that tool use AI? Yes, the generate tool is basically a form of AI that you just sort of build into Photoshop. So to remove things, it's detecting what's around there, it's coming up, working out roughly what should be filling in. So that's where we're at. So thank you very much to everybody who sent in images. What a great selection there. So what are we going to do then? So now's the point there where I need to kind of pick my top 3 here for extra smug points. And what I've decided I'm going to do is... oh, Nadia says, hang on, I sent a butterfly image. I take it you didn't receive it. No, Nadia, I didn't get a butterfly image from you. Ah, that's a shame. I would have enjoyed seeing that. No, definitely didn't get it. Okay, I'll go. Depends. If you sent it today, I've not checked the spam folder, so I will check it again. But no, I definitely don't remember seeing any butterfly image. That's a pity. Okay. Right. So smug points then. So I think what I'm going to do then is in reverse order. I think I will go for Sandra. I think with her picture of the spider, I think is a great shot, and I also like the fact that you went away, you came back to it, you played around with it, that certain level of persistence as well. So 10 extra bonus smug points to use there, Sandra. And then my second place one, I think, is going to go to April for the Colorado bug. I think this was a great, great shot. It's just nice and colourful, got it in the sunshine, a lot of it's in focus, and it really does feel like we're in the land of the giants. Really fills up the screen for that. And my first, my choice then for number 1 for the bonus 30 smug points is going to Marilyn with the bee. Like I said, it's just fun here. It's a good sized bee, good sized flower, nice vibrant colours. It's got that kind of everything you want out of a good garden macro shot. It's also that extraordinarily difficult. Every time anybody who's ever tried photographing bees in the garden knows that they just move at such an incredible pace. If ever I get a bee shot and it's in focus, I just sort of get this major smug moment. Woohoo! Punch the air. Yes, they feel so rare. I take off 140 photos and maybe get one in focus where I want it. There's obviously a whole skill set there which I'm fairly limited on, I think. But yes, beautiful, lovely colours, really vibrant. It just sort of has that kind of the yellows are against the magenta pink, but that bee and that fantastic pollen sac, I think there, great capture. Couple of bonus points then. I think really I do want to just say I'm going to give a bonus 5 smug points to Viji for the water magnification shot, because I'd completely forgotten about that. That's an idea. I thought it was a great one for that. And for Robert Gullick, I think I'll give you an extra bonus 5 points for just the sheer effort of doing 140 photos to do the focus stacking. That requires a lot more patience than I think I would have. So with that in mind, yes, I think next week, I think actually inspired by your bit there, I will talk a little bit about focus stacking, but there will also be a couple of options for feedback. I can maybe fit in 1 or 2 images for feedback. So if you have images that you would like direct feedback on for next week, then make sure you send them to me. Either put them into the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group, or email them to me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. Tell me what your sticking point is, tell me where you're struggling with, the kind of feedback you're looking for, and I will do my best to help you improve your photography. There's not many places on the internet which will do this, which will give you live, personal feedback, so a couple of spots for that next week. Okay, a couple more comments. April says, congrats all. Robert, Katie says, nice one, Marilyn. John says, congrats to all who got smug points. Susan says, well done all, lovely images. Debbie says, hi, can I show my pics? Tell me what you think. Well, like I say, Debbie, either go to the, put them into the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. If you just want to kind of show them off, then that's great. If you want direct feedback on one of the photos, then I've got this slot next week, then email it to me, or again put it into the book, into the group, and tell me what your sticking point is. And that again also, I'm not sure if you're on Facebook or not. If you're not, then just email me directly with them. Nick says, well done to all the Smug Points winners. Viji says, congratulations to the winners. Great picks and, as always, great inputs. Kim and Nurije says, well done, everyone. Great images. April says, have a great weekend. Everybody's saying, have a great weekend, right? So that's everybody running off. So next week, then, I'll talk a bit about focus stacking, and I have a couple of slots for feedback. Right, okay. That brings us to the end, I think, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a good week. Bye-bye.